all of a sudden it's like hiking a mountain. You look around, you're like, oh my God, everyone's still at the bottom. AKA, there's a lot of emotionally immature people around me, and I'm the only one that actually developed. You're going to start to see that. And then what happens? You might start to project, oh, this person, yeah, they just haven't done the work. You might start to project and expect things that are unfair to those around you.
You've trained yourself to be regulated in most circumstances, but most people have not. So to go back to what you were saying, how do you define emotional immaturity? How can you spot it? And then how do you disentangle from it so that you're not wrapped up in it? Hey everybody, it's Bianca.
Welcome back, Evolvers. It's Emilia.
We are diving into a very fun conversation about how to untangle, how to disentangle, more specifically, from emotionally immature people. We are all unfortunately surrounded by them. Many of us are recovering from being that. So, for those of you who are listening, I put my hand up. Um, it's an uncomfortable journey. It's really hard learning how to do this and learning to accept that this is many of the people that we love and that we care about. A lot of people are unfortunately emotionally immature because they don't have the skill set yet, and what we're diving into today is not how to cut them off, because we don't preach avoidance. That's not helpful, but rather
Mm.
how do we set boundaries? How do we disentangle? How do we not be enmeshed? And how do we, on the other side, really show up for ourselves with these people? So, I know you have a specific story that you're going to ground this in, and then we will get to more good.
Man, I think that I have more stories in this bucket than I think I want to admit to. And I know a lot of our listeners will resonate with this, because you ever feel like you have a conversation or you're talking to someone and then you walk away and you're like, how is that person able to coexist in the world as a adult man child or an adult female child? And like you just have that like real raw moment with yourself and you're like, what just happened in that conversation? And you kind of feel like a little mix of like gaslit and disoriented and a little bit of sadness maybe. That's been
Mm.
so much of my life, and I share that with comic relief because I have certainly been there. There has been so many times where I have been the emotionally immature person in the room, albeit less than I would say I would like to admit. But one of the things that I heard, growing up at a very young age, you're so mature for your age. And I kept hearing that again and again ever since I was like 7, 6. I could actually comprehend it. And I didn't fully know what that even meant. I just thought like, oh, like I'm an adult, hashtag adulting, really young. But the truth of the matter, when I grew up, right, quote unquote, still not ever growing up, but here I am 30 years old and I'm looking back and I'm like, what is adulting? Is it actually when you turn 18? Is it when you have hit your 30 30s? Is it like when do you actually become this quote unquote adult? And what I've realized in studying emotional intelligence is that emotional maturity is such a mm, eclectic mix of
Mm.
so many different other elements that make it up and that undermine it. So the story that I wanted to share, um
I pause you super quick just for a second? This is kind of
please.
off topic, but not really.
Yeah.
Being a young child, hearing, "Oh my god, you're so mature for your age." Did you have a positive or a negative relationship with that?
I had a positive relationship with that. I appreciate the question because at that time, I guess I associated that that was like a really good thing. Like that was something to
Yeah.
aspire to at a young age.
The reason I ask is because I actually think it's detrimental for a lot of people when they're told, "Oh my god, you're so mature," because they're not actually given the chance to be their
Mhm.
age, and then when
Yeah.
they grow up, they feel resentful of it, and then I feel like that's a contributor of emotional immaturity. It's like, "I didn't get to be a kid, so I'm gonna be a kid now."
That's
Um,
so fair. It's so fair.
partly, that's
Yeah.
not the full
Yeah.
reason why that happens, but I don't know why I felt a pull to ask that, so sorry
Yeah.
for the interruption, but not really, and
I'm
please
glad you
continue with
did
your
be.
story.
I always want to have you trust those pulls and lean into those, right? Number one, so that we can model that for some people to scratch their own itch when they feel pulled to that, because there's curiosity, I do believe, is the elixir of the soul. Um,
Mm,
and also because of the fact that there is that overlay of when you hear the word maturity, I think it's a greater question to ask the audience and have them reflect upon. And like to our listeners, do you think that maturity is a good thing or a bad thing? Have you pathologized it? Is it on a spectrum? Like, how do you see maturity? And if we're talking about this topic, which is how to disentangle from emotionally immature people, then you're likely someone who has been pained or hurt or had some degree of suffering as a result of someone that you really love and care about in your life being so emotionally unaware, and not just unaware, but comprising of all those elements of immaturity that have negatively impacted you. And so it's a really
yeah.
important topic to explore and explore even our own associations with it. So
Mm,
there's a plethora of, like I said, different stories, and I'm trying to think of the one that I initially wanted to ground this episode in. I think it had to do with a client. Yeah, it had to do with a client who was telling me essentially their take on an experience. For lack of better words, she had said she was going through a breakup and she was processing that breakup, and the way in which she was describing the breakup had to sound as if, now I want to give space for the fact that when you're going through a breakup, there's a lot of emotions. But I'm saying it was long after the breakup and before the breakup even happened. And
mm,
the way she would describe this whole situation was not actually trying to process the experience, but rather seeking external validation. So, for example, Amelia, like, I just don't know how he could have done that to me, completely
mm.
disregarding her role in the equation,
Pure
right?
victimization.
Pure, beautifully said. Yeah, totally victim mindset, not taking accountability for her actions. Like, I can't believe he mentioned this. I let him know 1,000 times, like, total exaggeration, that I didn't like when he had spoken to me that way or when he didn't text me when he got home. Insert how it made her feel. Now, the emotional maturity aspect that really got brought into the fold that initially inspired this podcast episode was not just that one dialogue that I had with a client of how um the processing emotionally was so much more stunted and out of proportion to the actual experience than I would say is statistically normal
Mm.
and rational. So
The pinch didn't match the ouch.
exactly, thank you for saying that, yeah, and, I wanna credit Dr. Lindsay Gibson's work, who has a book around emotionally immature, people, and amazing reads, I highly recommend it. That book has helped me really put to words what so many of us feel, and with this client in particular, we started to kind of unravel some of the ways in which she was thinking and the feelings that she was having that was so out of proportion. What we really uncovered was a truth that she did not like. And as a matter of fact, it was a truth that she totally ran away from and didn't want to take any accountability to, which is
Mhm.
due to her upbringing. The fact that she did not have any emotional resilience really modeled for her, right? This is where generational trauma has an impact towards emotional maturation. When
Mm.
you don't have anyone modeling, so for her, it was her mom and her grandmother who were her models, and they were not great at developing any sort of emotional resilience. Alan says, like, to me every now and then, that person had the emotional capacity of a teaspoon, meaning that when tough things happen, which is life, one doesn't know how to regulate. One doesn't know how to set boundaries. One doesn't know how to process the emotions that they're experiencing in a healthy, adaptive, and functioning um, central nervous system calming way. And the truth that this client really uncovered that she didn't like, that had her really turn away from her growth journey from my perspective, was the fact that her grandmother didn't try to work on building her own emotional maturity skill sets, and that got passed on to her mother, and her mother had no emotional maturity skill sets that were demonstrated. So
Yeah.
it was a generational thing that ended up happening to where now she is in her 50s and she has a challenge come down the line. Granted, many, many challenges, but the abilities to adaptively process, communicate the boundaries that she needs, and return to an active baseline that helps her feel safe. All of those skills she did not lean into trying to develop. And she took zero accountability for that. But yet she also wonders why her life is in quote unquote shambles all the time. And so we had this dialogue that was really difficult. And I think it was a great reminder of how important the work, quote unquote, is. Because when you're not taking accountability of your own emotional resilience, your own emotional immaturity, yes, there's things that happen to us and that get passed down in our family. And that makes it really difficult to even try to figure out how to equip yourself. And it's also a great opportunity to learn how to go from being emotionally stunted to developing a ladder that helps you climb the emotional maturity ladder. Because ultimately, when you aren't taking accountability for your own emotional maturation process, you end up hurting people. You end up having a distorted view of reality. And ultimately, that comes back down to having your life feel like it's out of control and in shambles. And I have a lot of empathy for those individuals, myself included, in the past when it felt totally impossible to, number one, develop emotional maturity within oneself. But then, number two, when you have done that, all of a sudden it's like hiking a mountain. You look around, you're like, oh my God, everyone's still at the bottom. AKA, there's a lot of emotionally immature people around me, and I'm the only one that actually developed. You're going to start to see that. And then what happens? You might start to project, oh, this person, yeah, they just haven't done the work. You might start to project and expect things that are unfair to those around you. So, one of the things to that be, I want to have a dialogue with you around how do we identify who is an emotionally immature person, right? Because I do think it's subjective who you're comparing to. If I were to compare myself to, you know, an astronaut, let's say, someone who flies in space, their emotional maturity, just because of what they do, they have to have specific skills that allow their regulation systems to be activated in a different way than someone such as myself. So it is subjective, but let's have a dialogue around how do we identify emotionally immature people?
It's
And then,
subjective, but it's also context specific.
fair,
I
fair,
don't
fair,
mean
fair.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I do wanna make sure that I highlight that because some people can be extremely regulated
Yeah.
in certain instances, but in other instances, they haven't developed that skill yet. It's like you might be really good at staying regulated at work, but
Yeah.
when your family says something to you, it's like all bets are
Cut off.
off.
Great point. Thank you for saying that.
Because, like, even an astronaut, they might be really good at their job, but we have
Right.
no idea what they're like at home, at a restaurant, in
So true.
other arenas. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but again, I felt that pull to make sure that I added that too,
Girl.
because again,
Yeah.
you've developed the skill of being highly regulated in all facets. You've literally trained yourself. Can I call you out super quick?
Please.
Amelia is low key a psycho in the absolute best way. I adore her. She literally used to
Uh,
train herself to watch scary movies and not flinch. Like, she would put on scary movies and repeat them over and over again so that
uh-huh.
she wouldn't get scared. And so she would stay emotionally regulated in different circumstances. Like,
At like 12 years old. Yeah. Well, I thought it
Freaking
was so
wild.
fascinating because our emotional response, like our emotional reactive systems are such an interesting study. And when you study yourself and you recognize that you can like pop off with like just so like watching a movie and you incite like that is able to incite terror within your central nervous system. It's like, oh my God, how easy can you be a puppet to so many other people? Right. So
Oh
like
my
I just
god.
wanted to be able to master my own central nervous system.
That's just scratching the surface. Like, you've done some crazy stuff. Again, amazing, amazing. It's why you are who you are. Now, I'm not doing that. I'm scared shitless of like most
No
scary
grudge.
movies. I can't dude. No, we're not going there. But anyway, you've trained yourself
Yeah.
to be regulated in most circumstances, but most people have not. So to go back to what you were saying, how do you define emotional immaturity?
Mm.
How can you spot it? And then how do you disentangle from it so that you're not wrapped up in it? I was an extremely emotionally immature person. I'm going to define myself as a recovering emotionally immature human being. I'm still on my journey towards getting closer to where you are. Um,
Mm.
it's a long journey. It'll be a lifelong journey, and I've accepted that. But when
Mm.
you're in that space, the scary thing is you don't even realize you're doing it. It's
Yeah.
it's just like it's part of it feels like it's just part of who you are. Like you feel like you can't control
Mm.
your reactions because they feel as though they just are you. It feels as though this is who I am and this
Yeah.
is the truth, and it's this visceral feeling. I was talking to a client. I had a client session right before we started this recording, and um, we're talking about her dating life, and she's made a lot of very, very risky choices in her dating life because
Mhm.
she was surrounded by emotionally immature people and emotionally immature parents, and she never learned, like your client, the skills and the
Oh.
tools. So she was a parentified child. She had
Mm.
two very mentally and physically ill parents who she ended up having to take care of. And
Yeah.
so she never learned healthy relationship skills. And so we created her relationship standard list just for dating, just to like be
Nice.
safe in dating.
Right.
And we were talking about instinct versus intuition.
Mhm.
And we did an episode on this a couple of episodes ago, but intuition is that quiet voice in the back of your head saying, this doesn't seem right.
Mhm.
But our instinct was developed from the experiences that we had with emotionally immature persons. So your intuition might say this isn't safe, but your instinct is bypass that
Right.
so that we can get love, so that we can get this, so that we can get that. When you're emotionally immature, you're acting on pure instinct.
Mhm.
It's it's all fear, it's all reaction, it's all scarcity driven, fear-based narrative that we're acting on. And
Mm.
again, the thing is you don't even realize you're doing it. So when you're trying to identify it in other people, I know you recently wrote an article
Yeah.
about this. This was written about a week ago, and we've done episodes on this. So, and we're going to continue doing episodes on this. So if this is
Yeah.
something you're interested in learning more, please subscribe on YouTube, subscribe to the podcast, subscribe on all the platforms that we have. Our Instagram, we also put a lot of content out on there, more specifically like how to's and whatnot. But
Mhm.
kind of to dive in and let's get into some specifics.
Definitely.
How can you identify in another person? Because we already did an episode on are you emotionally immature, and we kind of talked about already what some of those indicators are.
Yeah.
How can you indicate it in other people?
Mm.
So what are some orange and like red flags? Actually, more so orange because we know the red flags. What are the orange
Mhm.
flags that we ignore that end up
Yes.
becoming red flags that we can start
Mhm.
paying attention to?
The number one that I'm gonna baseline everything in, like, this is the root, the crux of why emotional immaturity exists and why it gets passed down generationally and it has a ripple effect, is because there's inherently a core belief that's been passed down that we are responsible for other people's feelings. Like, we are responsible for how
Mhm.
other people feel. So the orange flag is this: if you've ever heard, "Oh, he made me feel like crap," or "She made me feel like I was such a jerk," or "My mom made me feel like I was being such a bad child," or "My dad made me feel like crap because he said blah 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 blah." Right? Any "you made me feel X" is a
Yeah.
giant red and orange flag. I would say orange because we tend to overlook this, because what's underneath that is the belief that I don't have, like, if someone's saying that, that is them literally outing themselves saying, "I do not take full responsibility for my own emotional state, nor do I care to." And so that number one thing is the epitome of
Mm.
all the other signs that are going to be underneath that.
Can I add a caveat to that though?
Yeah.
We are not saying that toxic environments do not exist, because there are, like,
Yeah.
if you're in a toxic work environment, it can, or if you're in a toxic relationship, or if you are just in harmful environments, emotional attunement is a real thing. Mirror neurons are a real thing.
Mhm.
We do absorb the energy of other people. What we're saying is the other person is fully blaming other people all the time for why they
Mhm.
are the way they are, why they feel the way they feel, why they did what they did.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's so important to mention too. And so, like, what is emotional maturity? If we were to start from that state and then see the inversion of that, emotional maturity truly is in someone taking and being fully responsible for their own emotional state, even when they might be in an environment that is triggering them or is activating their own mirror neurons. So, if you're someone who is emotionally mature, and you're in an environment or a social group that happens to light up your mirror neurons, say, for example, a client that's emotionally immature, that knows that being around their friends on Friday nights past 9 p.m. usually triggers all of the states to get super sloppy and whatnot, they will take ownership of the fact that they have a choice to remove themselves or to not engage in
Yes.
specific behaviors to get sloppy with their friends on a Friday, Saturday, Thursday, Tuesday night, whatever, right? That's them taking responsibility for their own voice and choice in the matter, which inherently connects to their emotional state and the behaviors that they choose to have come with that. The opposite is
Awesome.
true. Emotional immaturity is no voice, no choice, no acknowledgement of one's own responsibility to oneself, their emotional state, the thoughts that they have, and the behaviors that go with that. So, with that orange,
Okay, awesome.
you want to stay there?
Let's stick to the one. Yeah, let's stick to the one. Again, we'll do future episodes on this, but I want to make sure we get to like the
House.
meat and
Let's get
potatoes
in the
of
meat
this.
potatoes. Okay.
Let's just say emotional immaturity, the lack of responsibility for their own emotions and their reactions, okay?
Yeah.
How do we actually disentangle? Because again, if you're somebody like how I used to be, where your core belief is it's your fault, you're
Mm.
highly likely to develop a narrative that, well, this person is only dysregulated because of me. And so I need to do something in
Right.
order to fix it. And I feel like a lot of our listeners probably relate more to that. Um,
Mhm.
or they're closer on that end of the spectrum than they are on the opposite side. So
I can
for
validate that.
somebody who for somebody who is more probably anxiously attached, for somebody who is more um insecure, or has had difficulties in their assertiveness, in their confidence, in some of these really critical skills,
Mhm.
how do you actually know to trust yourself to be able to disentangle. So like what are a couple of simple things that people can do to be able to start pulling away and trusting that they're making the right decision? Because again, me in the past, I justified everything that the person did. And it was
Right.
always something that I did. It was my fault. It was this, it was that. It was over identification, over like, no, 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 it's my fault. It's my fault. It's my fault.
Right. And that, that's I cannot sugarcoat that. It's going to be difficult. It really is because
Oh yeah.
here's the thing, when it comes to emotionally immature people, they unknowingly for the most part are like energy vampires.
Mm,
And they don't realize it, but they're contributing and extorting the things that allow you to be emotionally manipulatable. And so, for example, someone who has that belief system that other people's um, feelings are my responsibility, that is going to allow that lifeline, that codependency relationship to continue to be enmeshed and entangled. And it will activate your central nervous system more likely than not whenever you start to pull away or actually start to adopt a new belief system. Like, for example, um, their emotions are their responsibility, that simple belief system. And it's important for me to prioritize my emotional health before the other person, right? The classic put your mask on first before you do it to others. When you start to do that, you will know that this is right for you because it will feel uncomfortable. Like that's one of the reasons why a lot of people actually don't disentangle from emotionally immature people because it doesn't quote unquote feel right. The truth is it's mixed up and it's backwards because of the fact that it started from a place of a core responsibility for someone else's feelings. So, what I would say the first step for someone who might be in that position and might have that belief system there before we even get into, okay, let's change things. I would encourage the client, the person, the listener to really focus on adopting a belief around their emotional health that my mental health and well being matters. And it is
mhm,
important to me to uphold a high degree of emotional health, which means you're not feeling like shit about yourself all the time. And so when it's very plain and simple. I can't like I don't want to sugarcoat it. So when you start there, what happens if if you start to adopt that belief system? You
mm,
rewire your focal point to be me focused, which will feel
mm.
selfish initially. Oh my
So
goodness, I'm focused on my mental health. I must be like ensue all the guilt and shame and blame that your inner critic is literally queued up and locked and loaded to deploy and shoot at free will towards you.
mhm,
So when you focus on that though, you actually can start to like think about or track or practice more mindfulness around self check-ins like, "Oh, okay, I'm feeling like crap right now after this conversation with my sister or after this conversation with my partner. Hmm, my emotional health actually does matter, and it is really important for me to prioritize this." Okay, if you just have that simple check in, that's a great start because you're literally in the flesh of it by way of where your focus is flowing, starting to disentangle from having the spotlight be on the other person's emotional well being. And instead, think of it like a flashlight pointing back on yourself and saying, "What am I feeling? What am I? What are my responses to this?" And when you can start to focus on that, you as the priority and your emotional health, then you can actually start to build a foundation around what it actually means to be emotional dependent and meshed with the other person. So this is the step number 2 that I'm going to suggest
mm,
for anyone who decides to go and read the article. This will also be number 2 in the article, which is limiting, not totally cutting it off because that's going to have your central nervous system freak the F out. As a matter of fact, that's the last thing again that I would suggest, is limiting or reducing the emotional dependency. So what does that actually look like?
mm,
What it usually is what I hear from clients in our community the most is resisting the urge to solve other people's problems. Because when an emotionally immature person has a problem, they're just going to go right to the person who gives them the cookies first, again and again and again and again. And that usually is the person who is expending their energy and letting the energy vampires kind of take that from them at free will.
I think it's also developing a sense of dependency on yourself that you can figure things out, because the a big reason why we become so enmeshed with
Mhm.
other people is because we don't trust ourselves to do things. I'm going to give a
Right.
quick story. Emilia has been an incredible leader for me, and even though I hate it, one of the things that
Yeah. Knowing
the running
Bianca's
joke.
history of emotional dependency, I have set her up well, and she's hated me the way through.
Oh my god, every time I would ask Amelia a question, she'd go, "Hey, B, there's this thing called Google, go use it." And I'm like, "Why can't you just give me the answer?"
Yeah.
But she was, again, being such a good leader, she was trying to teach me, you don't need to rely on me. You don't need to
Yeah.
depend on me. You have the capability within yourself to go figure it out. And like, I'm
Mhm.
here if you need me, but you don't need me. So
Right.
if you keep finding yourself being enmeshed with emotionally immature people, there's part of the reason is because you also don't trust yourself to make decisions. You don't trust yourself
And they
to
extort that.
yeah, to put boundaries or to rely on yourself or to call other people out on the fact that they're doing the same thing. So
Mhm.
you're more likely to just appease and fawn rather than to
Yeah.
put up those boundaries or have some really good nonviolent communication with the other person and say, "Hey, you know what? I'm really feeling some type of way about this. I'm noticing this and I'm noticing this. Can we have a dialogue about it?"
Yeah. So for example, like one of the, like I obviously could, and this has been something as a leader, like has been honestly a big struggle because it when you're the person that has all the answers initially from an ego standpoint, that feels really good, right? Like just stroke my
Yeah.
ego. I'm the best. Yeah. Yum, 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 yum. Right. Like it's so validating. But in reality, it is such a short term play, not only for you as the person who's going to be the quote unquote go to for everyone, which is just totally
Yeah.
unsustainable and unfair to you, but also to the person who is developing a codependent relationship with you because it's taking away from them. How I say it with clients is it's robbing them of their own abilities to develop skill sets that are life skills that they can take with them and apply no matter where they go. So while I could give you the answers, right? Just give you the fish. It would be a lot easier right now instead of taking the time to say, well, what do you think is the best way to handle that? Right. And reflect it back to
Yeah.
you for you to actually be like, wait, I have a thought process of my own. Absolutely. And here's the thing, at very young age, there's a thing called grooming. Adults love being the first person that their kids turn towards to make sure that mommy and daddy have the pedestal. And so at a very young age, adults will groom children to develop a lack of dependency so that any adult authority figure actually has the quote unquote final say, which contributes to a whole lot of crap that I'm not going to get into right now. But that develops over time to where children don't realize that they have their own sense of autonomy and independence and thought processes for that matter. So,
So let's sum this up. So number one is developing this sense that my mental health and my emotions matter,
yep,
and that I'm going to prioritize those first.
exactly.
Number two was understanding when that emotionally immature person is overly relying upon you, or when you're relying too much upon them, and learning how to call that out in a loving, safe, adaptive way. Or maybe not even loving, but just in a more safe and adaptive way.
Yeah, so it's limit your emotional dependency or their emotional dependency.
Perfect.
And you can use
Perfect.
phrases like, again, it's in the article, I trust that you can figure this out. Or what do you think is the best way to handle this?
Perfect.
And then the third one, we kind of talked about B, which was boundaries and detaching with compassion. You were just going to say something. I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Nope. Nope. You're good.
Okay.
So the last one is boundaries and effective communication.
Boundaries. Yeah. Um, the boundaries are the honestly, I feel like when people realize that they're in an unhealthy relationship, boundaries is the first quote unquote buzzword that people go to. Like, I just need to set boundaries. Like, there's a lot more steps before you actually can feel good about asserting boundaries that I think a lot of people don't realize need to be in place for those boundaries to be upheld, right? But ultimately, you can say something like, if you recognize that, okay, I am dealing with a man child right now, or I am dealing with a woman child right now, and because I listened to Evolve Ventures podcast and your girls equipped me with the tools, and I read this article, I know exactly what to say right now because there's someone who's coming and trying to creep in on my energy and trying to be dependent. What I can say is something like, I can't discuss this right now. Let's revisit this another time. Boom, done. That's a boundary.
Well
There's
said.
so many different types of boundaries for you to disentangle from emotionally immature people. Excuse me. And that is a life skill that I strongly encourage every single person listening to this podcast to develop and to go full heart in that developing, because it will serve you for the rest of your life and bring so much joy to your soul. Trust me, it has been one of the saving grace in my life.
Emilia just pulled a Google it on all of you, just FYI. No, I'm just kidding. Go to evolveventurestech.com and we have all the answers for you, I promise.
We got you. We got you.
What's your episode suggestion so we can wrap this up?
This was a fun one and a little bit longer than I expected, but
It's all good.
telling you, this thing, the people need this. It's 277 Motivational Monday, 7 ways to be heard. Yep.
3 ways to be heard.
Wait, what?
You
Oh, I
read
thought it
it
was
wrong.
7. Well, same, but
It's all
deviate.
good, honestly. Whatever. 3 getting off the rails here. 331, are you emotionally immature? All right, everybody. We hope you enjoyed this episode. We hope that you are able to take so much value away from this. If you need more one on one help doing things like this, please, please, please do not hesitate to reach out. We are still running the 14-day free trial on the You Do You coaching and or therapy program. We have one-on-one coaching and therapy. There are so many ways to get involved with Evolve that will help you become the greatest version of yourself in 2025. And we cannot wait to be your guides on that journey. All right, everybody. We will see you next time. Bye.
Everyone.